Welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Dive into a unique narrative with our hosts, Michelle Strasburger, the insightful CHRO, and Dominique Sanfleur, the visionary CXO. Together, they bring dynamic perspectives that ignite thought-provoking dialogue from the C-suite. Each week, join us for electrifying sessions that confront the very challenges modern CXOs navigate in today's fast-paced business landscape. When split-second decisions loom, must it be talent or revenue that takes the hit? Or is there a harmonious crossroad where both can thrive? Can we blur the lines between talent and revenue? In every episode, we provide executive leaders with 3 strategic takeaways, transformative insights that will propel you to master the delicate balance between people and profit. It's not about winners or losers, but crafting an environment where everyone triumphs. Tune in and step closer to redefining executive success.
Love
Hi,
it.
everybody. We're here. It's Thursday. I can't believe it's Thursday. This week's gone by so fast. It's a
It's
short
been a
week.
theme.
So welcome, everybody, to the CXO and CHRO Walk Into the Bar. I am Michelle Strasburger, the CEO of HR Rebooted, where we work with CEOs to build an intentional culture so you can scale your organization without losing your soul.
And I'm Dominique St. Fleur, CEO of Intramark, where we help organizations create a data layer on culture to anticipate risks like productivity gaps and unwanted turnover. Michelle, we're super excited to have 2 wonderful guests, Angela and Lisa, with us today. Please introduce yourselves, and we'll dive into the cool topic where with you two as our experts in this area.
Excellent, great. I'll go first. I'm Lisa Klarner, and I'm the owner of LK Coaching and Consulting. We help organizations of all sizes to navigate technological and organizational changes using proven methodologies and tools to accelerate ROI and increase employee satisfaction.
And I'm Angela Hines. I am the founder of AMH Strategic Partners. And basically, what I do is help bring clarity where there's chaos. And I work in the same area as Lisa, organizational change management, and leadership development, and some process improvement. So excited to be here with you guys today.
This is a great topic. So we're talking about managing people risks during technology implementation. And it actually sounds like an oxymoron because I think when you're talking about technology, we're not usually thinking about people, right? I mean, we're talking about systems. And so, when we're implementing technology, we're thinking about systems and we're thinking about computers and we're thinking about everything that goes into that system. And usually there are people and it affects people, right? And there's people that have to do the work, but we're not always the first thought. And so maybe we start there, like how does technology implementation and bringing technology changes to the workplace and to organizations affect people, and what are those risks that we should be aware of and we should be thinking about ahead of time before we even start the process?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. One of the things that people don't really take into account when there's change happening, especially technology. We know technology moves at the speed of light, but people don't. It takes time for people to change. And if you don't make room for that, if you don't plan for that, it's not going to go well. That's been proven over and over so many times. Which is why I think it's very interesting that we see companies that learn that lesson and they move to bring organizational change management structure and support there. And then once they get to a certain point, they start to drop back off. But I think the big thing we have to remember is that while technology scales at a certain rate and you can predict it, people do not.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think from my perspective too, it's really just helping the employees to understand why. So in the flow of our days, and even all of us here on the call today, I mean, how many meetings we've already had, and it's not even lunchtime where I'm at. And so our days are just a blur at times. And so how do we get the attention of the people so that they are not feeling like they're forced into this change, and they feel supported and heard, and the pace that at which the change is navigated is also considered, like how fast can this change actually happen based on all the other changes that the employees have. So recognizing and acknowledging that. So having a change management expert such as Angela or myself involved to be able to connect all the dots. What's the roadmap? What are all the other changes happening? What are the messages that resonate with the affected end users?
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing is, change can only happen as quickly, or process can only move as quickly as its tightest bottleneck, right? Which and bottleneck, not necessarily in a negative connotation, but the bottleneck oftentimes, especially with tech implementation, is not going to be the tech itself. It's going to be the people. To your point, Angela, people don't move at the speed of light. Tech does. I really like that. And Lisa, you hit it on the head. It's we underestimate that human factor, that resistance to change, that unclear roles, really getting up to speed on incentives needs to change as well. Really getting that human behavior on board with the tech, because there's that behavior change. In some of our previous conversations, you and Angela, you and Lisa have implemented change successfully at organizations that are lasting and enduring even to this day. That's some organizations. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and any wisdom that you can impart on organizations that are going through change right now, and what they should be thinking about.
Sure. I'll start, Angela, this time. We'll tag team. And so the one that comes to mind is one of the clients that we worked with that went through an agile transformation. And so it was not only an organizational change, but it also required implementation of some new tools. And so the area that my firm focused on was about the tool side. So again, it's about interjecting and pulling in the organizational impacts with the technology impacts and helping people come along on that journey with us. And so part of it is establishing the structure and the understanding of why, again, as I mentioned earlier, and then how can I learn in a variety of ways? How can I hear from the people that can help me understand why this change is important to me? So having training delivered by people who understand the tools and how the culture at the organization is. So somebody who can speak in a way that resonates with the attendees of the training. And then it makes me think too about the change networks, which I'd love to hear Angela's perspectives on this. And so really the change network and having that established and having that live beyond. So all the folks that are trained along the way, having them become experts, having training resources available afterwards, and then the change networks comes to mind. So Angela's got some great viewpoints on this. Angela, would you like to elaborate?
Yeah. So when it comes to establishing that change, I think there's a couple interesting things. I think we often underestimate the power of the people. We live in a society where we have been blessed not to have a lot of the civil unrest that we see in other areas. I'm going to tell you about a company that I worked with, and I was there to implement a change, a system that previously they tried to implement, and it went horribly wrong. It got to the point where the team members basically went to leadership and said, we do not want this. So I was hired then to come in and to help implement that same change. And I'll tell two things that have to happen is, first of all, you have to have that historical knowledge going in, taking time to make the right assessments versus jumping in and thinking that you know what's needed is super important, because sometimes when you're flying high at the top, you don't take the time to really think about what's happening. And one of the other things I did and that I tend to do, I always say that I'm an advocate for the end user. That is my role. So going into these projects, one of the things that I always like to do is kind of try to come in from the bottom and work my way up, which the ground up approach has been successful because you get to identify those different gaps. And literature tells us, the research tells us that, and it's talked about it so much, how the middle managers are those missing areas, right? That's like the gap when it comes to implementing change. So one of the things that I love to do is go in and create, and it's a little bit more than a change network, establish some governance so that there is clear communication at all levels. So pulling together that governance board that then helps to have oversight over that change network is super, super important. But when you get it in and you do it right, change can sustain. So yeah, absolutely.
I think there's importance to having that start at the bottom and work with the end users. And if you miss that step, you can have a lot of resistance there. And so I've worked with a client where we've implemented or they've implemented tools and they didn't do that step. And then the end user is resistant because they're like, I wouldn't have done it this way. And now I have to use it and it doesn't work. And so I'm not going to do it because they didn't listen to me.
Right.
And you what I'm hearing is, between Lisa, what you said, Michelle, and Angela, people will not implement or they will not use a process they don't trust. And building that trust happens with, to your point, Angela, that bottoms up approach, the people that, are impacted by this change, that will be using the tool on the day-to-day. If they're not bought in and their needs and requirements aren't well understood and their feedback is not incorporated in that process, then you've just made a very expensive investment that you're trying to shove down the organization. That typically doesn't work because behavior change doesn't come that way. If people don't trust it, if you haven't built that trust in the process, you're making a very expensive decision without the guarantee of adoption. So I like the bottoms up approach. And Lisa, I like the mention of the trust angle, reinforced by what Michelle said as well.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of integrity too. So do what we say we're going to do. But also, just as you were talking, Dominique, I was thinking about when we think about bringing the users in early, at one of our clients, we rolled out a dependency management solution. And so we actually had the customers, the impacted employees involved in building out and vetting and validating that the way it was created was correct. And this is where it costs companies so much money and rework because they actually get to the point where they're ready to roll something out and here to realize it's not exactly aligned with how the person who's using it works. And so then they have to go back to the drawing board and redo it and pull the customer. And I've seen it happen, and we hear about it in the industry as well. But I've seen it also on the positive side, like as Angela was saying, bottoms up. We have everyone involved in building the solution, and then they become the advocates. They say, you know what, I was involved in this, and they maybe even shout out in the trainings and say, I was involved in helping build this because of XYZ processes we use. And so we've seen amazing adoption rates as a result of that model. And so we do use that whenever we can.
Really cool. Really cool. I there are a few questions I have, and I want to throw one out, is usually when an organization is going through change, they're going through a lot of change all at the same time. Technology is going to be just one piece of that change. There's probably a lot of other change. There's probably some big initiative happening, right? So M&A, they're ready to go public. There's some big event that is, really bringing forth a lot of change, one component of which is the technology piece and how that interacts with people. But people, right, their behavior, will have to change with, with the new technology, with the new process, with the new reality of where the organization's going. How do you keep momentum, build momentum, deal with skepticism, with change fatigue? When there's a lot of change happening, and now you're the third consultant coming in, helping the organization go through another piece of change, and you're there's a third, session that this employee is going through. How do you help motivate through that?
Yeah. So I experienced some of the same thing, exactly what you're talking about, in two different environments. The first was M&A, and you have all your systems all your processes that you are trying to translate to a new company, right? Well, there were also some policies. We had Brexit happen in the midst of that. So it not only impacted some of the work that was done directly, it impacted the financials, it impacted a lot of things. So what we like to do is to come together. You have to have that brain trust. There are some areas that like to work independently, and I'll go back to the governance structure. That is the importance of the governance structure, so that we are planning together and we have a full scope of what is happening from an organizational level versus an IT perspective. And I think that was one of the huge things that I loved about working with one organization, is that it was in a position where you could see everything, even outside of IT. So when organizational change management is housed inside HR, there's huge benefits to it. I think some people are skeptical to let go of that because it feels like you're losing control, but you get much more insight. And I'll just jump to the other organization. When you have programs, we have our program managers that manage those multiple projects, but a lot of times people don't look at change management from the same perspective. So at that organization, what I did is create a huge map so that we can see the heat maps and understand not just what changes are happening, but looking at our people and saying, hey, our teams that are supporting this change are being hit by this other one. We need to come and meet in the middle and talk together to figure out, okay, your department, let's say you're in, customer experience. Hey, customer experience, this is what we have going on in IT. Let's pull that together. And that governance structure brought it back together and really helped. So long story short, we have to start looking at portfolio management for managing change.
I like that.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, depending on the size of the organization, I think there needs to be some kind of like feedback loop. And maybe that's the same thing of coming together and talking about it. I was doing a presentation the other day and it was totally different. It was a team building training based upon predictive index. And the organization had just gone through a restructure. So this was like a brand new team. And so we did this, understanding your work-related behaviors and motivating needs. And as part of the predictive index, we can see your natural style and then kind of what you look like over the last 6 months. And some of the individuals they were drastically different from their natural styles. And that's because of these changes that had happened. And so it came up in conversation of like, they feel like what's expected of them is very different because of all of the changes. So they're starting to get this change fatigue. And so it came up in conversation, and the manager of the whole organization was there, the vice president, or I forget her title, but she was there. And she said, I get it. We've gone through a lot of change. We need to pause. We need to slow down on the changes. And that's the commitment I'm making to you. We're going to just take a break on changes. And now we're just going to solidify. That's what we're doing over the next few months, is we're just going to solidify, and we're going to build process, and we're going to start to like become an organization, become a team. And that's what this training was doing for them. But I think having that feedback and somebody saying to them, I hear you, and this is what we're going to do, and having that feedback loop is really important for folks. And it took a training to do that, but it's an opportunity for people to say, here, we need a timeout. There's too much change going on.
Yeah.
And it's
I
about,
just want
go ahead, Angela.
I'm sorry. I'm going to add something real quick to your point. Rapid, multiple changes within an organization, according to Gallup, they did this report back in December, is one of the top reasons that people are disengaging or disconnecting at work, quiet quitting, and looking to move somewhere else. So you hit that spot on.
It's overwhelming. Yeah.
And having it be safe. So we talk about trust, but I think about psychological safety. So somebody being able to say, I'm overwhelmed and there's too much change happening, and not being scrutinized or called out, but having a leader who can then take that information, or even perhaps it's the leader that says, hold on a second, my team is so overloaded, we can't take this change on, and we need to talk about options. So that's what it sounds like happened with you, Michelle, in your example, like the leader stepped up. So it's having the awareness as a leader of what's going on with your team. And it makes me think of the daily touch points, Dominique, that you have with what Intramark provides, is having that sort of consecutive look over a certain number of days, where I'd be curious if maybe that seems applicable here. So I don't know if you want to share it, because it makes me think of what you do, Dominique, with Vibe and checking in on teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, having that, more of that sequential approach to, gathering feedback, understanding the feedback that you're getting, and then redeploying, and getting feedback from the right areas, to keep that, again, that data layer on culture, that consistent measure of where pressure is being added, where pressure is being released, to understand what heel that you could shift weight on, and when to take a pause. I think what the group's hitting on is quite important, is in going through change, having sprints of change and sprints of pauses are super important, but very important is, are you listening while a lot of change is happening, right? Because if you don't have that mechanism where you're able to listen through the noise, right? There's a lot going on. A lot of pots are banging right now, right? You're going through an M&A, your policy's changing, systems are changing, a lot of stuff. It's very easy not to listen in an environment like that. Not because you don't want to, but it takes some work. It takes intentionality and effort. But having a flexible process like Vibe, offers during a change process is important. But it lends to a question for you, Lisa and Angela. In a scenario, we Michelle, you hit on a very important part, right, where there was a leader that stepped up and made a decision, the right call from listening. And Angela, you touched on the governance piece, and Lisa, you touched on the trust part a couple times. Who owns the change? Ultimately, who owns the process? Who's the head of the governor board, if you will? Especially when there's a lot of stakeholders, a lot of change. Who's ultimately the owner?
Well, Dominique, there's an old song that says money talks.
I know that song. Good song.
Yeah. Ultimately, it often breaks down to who is paying for that change, who's responsible for implementing that, like who's got the funding dollars, which is why, the governance board, we get to have all of these conversations ahead of time to already outline and understand who makes which decisions when, and what is our go, no go look like? What is our progress looking like? And one of my favorite leaders, amazing change practitioner that I worked under, always said, hey, we don't want any watermelons in our reporting, okay? Green on the outside, but red on the inside. So we keep that communication very open and very transparent.
Does that create friction though? So if it depends on where the money, who owns the budget, does that create friction across the organization?
So here's where it lands. A lot of these decisions that I've seen, I've not had any situation where there hasn't been where there's been a leader that is like, no, we have to push. Now, we saw what happened with Sonos and the application they were trying to roll out and some new products. They didn't listen to the people. So people are trying to speak through the noise. They continued to push it out, and it was a disaster. So outside of that, I don't know. That's outside of my bounds, because I guess.
Well, and as you're talking about that, Angela, I'm thinking about, oftentimes we see a change management center of excellence, which connects, and you mentioned it earlier, the portfolio management.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about it is for sure about the money, like where's the money and what's the rollout. Like if it's a workday rollout, that it just has to go. But like, what are these other things, and how can timelines? So at times I've seen timelines shift.
Yeah.
So it's like it's still moving forward, but it comes into the slow down to speed up perspective, or maybe you do a rollout in waves instead of in a big bang approach. So like it comes to, of course, that the key decision maker who has the funding, and what is the why behind it. So is there a license for the software expiring by the end of the year, and there's no choice, you have to move forward, there's funding for this, you have to get it done. But it's the awareness and bringing the users in, but also at the same time, it's like the change managers in the middle. I'm gonna reach my hands up higher. The change managers in the middle, and then you have the funding, the person who has the funding, the change management COE, the HR team, the portfolio management team. So how do you take all the pieces of the puzzle and figure out what is the right solution to address the resistance or the concerns that people have with the timeline?
Yeah, and I think, Lisa, those great points. And what I have seen happen is leaders that are responsive to the voice of the people, and they say, okay, you're telling me these things. Let me get some evidence. Let me get some, validation on these points. Okay, well, if we can't come off these green screens right now, what we'll do is we'll pull out some money so we can stay on a little bit longer. And these are the things we have to do. That is where risk management comes in, and ensuring that from a change management perspective, for any program, major program, there should be a risk management approach already applied across the entire thing, so that you can see those risks and they are very visible. And there's understanding what happens when these things take place. But we talked about this earlier, guys, making sure to take time to plan well, to expect the unexpected. So to have a plan A, B, C, and D. And I think the biggest thing is just being very responsive to the voice of the people who are going to use that technology. Because what I found is they know the customers better than a lot of people think that they do. And they're the ones who can tell you if something is going to work in a system or not. And I have not seen that to fail yet.
And I have one quick thing, and then I'm going to hint. Then one quick thing is involve your change management team early and keep them embedded throughout the whole time frame, because all the things that we're talking about here can be minimized, the risks can be mitigated, the process will go so much smoother as if you involve the change management team early, which is oftentimes a challenge that we see companies navigating.
Yeah.
On that button, I want to make sure people can find you and Lisa, you and Angela easily. So we'll include some contact info for you two in the comments to make sure that people can act on that, because I totally agree with that, Lisa. Getting the right professionals involved early, not later, is going to be critical, because the planning process, to your point, Angela, making sure you're a sufficient planning and listening as part of the planning process is had, because I could draw an example as well where I was at another organization, and again, these very expensive mistakes are made pushing technology without really understanding what people on the front line need, think, and what their input is with this new technology. It happens way too often, a lot more often than people think, and it's very, very expensive. And so we have folks like Lisa and Angela that could help avoid very expensive mistakes. So really appreciate that.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts? Any last words of wisdom that you want to share with our audience?
Prioritize the people side of change and reach out to Angela and I, and we'd love to talk to y'all. And thank you so much for Dominique and Michelle for having us here.
Yeah, and I think my last words would be this: communications is not change management. If all you have someone doing is creating emails and newsletters, and you're not allowing them to do the change work because you don't know what that is, call in a professional. It's more than just communication.
Absolutely.
Love that. Love that.
Very important.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I've learned a lot, and I'm super excited. We will put some nuggets in the comments. We will put your LinkedIn profiles in the comments as well, so people can reach out to you early and often. Like people late, I get the same thing, so I hear you. And stay tuned for our next LinkedIn Live at the bar. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.
You've just experienced another episode of The CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Thank you for joining us. Please join us next week at noon Eastern for more strategic content to help you scale your business. You can follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube for additional content or episodes you may have missed. The links will be in the comments section. If you'd like more information or to schedule time with Michelle or Dominique, follow the link in the comments section to book time on their calendar. Until next week, cheers.